Okay, let's dive right into this explainer and talk about something that literally every property owner dreads, but honestly, very few people actually understand on a scientific level. We are completely reframing water damage today. This isn't just some basic household chore or a minor inconvenience that you can mop up with a handful of towels. Not at all. It's a high stakes, ticking clock battle against the unforgiving laws of physics, thermodynamics, and time itself. From the literal second moisture goes where it shouldn't, an invisible countdown begins. So what really happens when the water stops? Most of us think that once we shut off that burst pipe or the floodwaters finally recede, the worst of the disaster is over, right? Grabbing a mop and cleaning up those visible puddles feels like a real solution. But scientifically, that's just triage. The real invisible threat to your property's structural integrity, and ultimately your health, is quite literally just getting started right beneath the surface. To truly grasp how this works, let's ground our narrative in a real-world microcosm. Take a place like Westerville, Ohio. The hazards here represent perfectly predictable disaster patterns driven by geography and aging infrastructure. I mean, you've got the Alum Creek spring snowmelt overwhelming local drainage systems. Over in Minerva Park, heavy clay soil refuses to let water absorb naturally, so it just seeps right into basements. In the historic homes of Old Westerville, outdated plumbing combined with expanding winter ice leads to catastrophic freeze-thaw pipe bursts. And up near Polaris, summer storms regularly knock out the power, which leads straight to sump pump failures. It's basically a perfect storm of structural vulnerabilities. Now, when those vulnerabilities are breached, your property physically transforms. It literally becomes a giant sponge, and you'll start to notice the sensory, visceral signs of hidden moisture taking over. We aren't just talking about a wet carpet here. We're talking about ruined, soggy insulation. We're talking about baseboards visibly swelling up and physically popping off the drywall. You might even see a chalky white mineral powder, called efflorescence, blooming right across your concrete basement walls as that heavy clay soil aggressively drives moisture through the foundation. Now, what's really interesting about this is how the restoration industry scientifically triages these disasters. Because water isn't just water, it's strictly broken down by contamination level. Category 1 is clean water. Think a broken supply line or clean rainwater. It's a low health threat, but you still need rapid extraction. Category 2 is gray water. Imagine a dishwasher leaking or a toilet overflowing, but without feces. That's a medium threat, so it requires heavy sanitization. And then there's Category 3. Black water. These are your severe biohazards, like raw sewage backups or river flooding. This level of toxicity is so high that you have to immediately and completely remove porous building materials just to keep everyone safe. But here is the terrifying reality about those categories. Category 1, clean water, it doesn't stay clean. If you leave that clean water sitting on a floor or trapped inside a dark wall cavity for just 48 hours, it chemically and biologically degrades right into Category 2, gray water. Bacteria naturally starts multiplying, so time literally turns a simple, clean plumbing leak into a dangerous contamination hazard. That rapid degradation is exactly why 60 is arguably the most important metric in the restoration industry. Professional crews are always aiming for a strict 60-minute emergency dispatch window. Why the rush? Because in this industry, speed literally determines the total loss of the property. Every single minute that water sits there, it wicks further up your drywall, seeps deeper into the subfloor, and drastically increases the exponential cost of the damage. And if you hesitate, you are going to slam right into another terrifying number, 48. 48 hours is the absolute maximum amount of time you have before microscopic mold spores begin actively colonizing inside your damp wall cavities and on your wet framing lumber. Once you cross that 48-hour threshold, you're no longer just dealing with a simple water removal job. No, you are dealing with a full-blown environmental health hazard that's going to require incredibly expensive microbial remediation. So, how do professionals actually stop this ticking clock? Well, I'll tell you what they don't do. They don't just open the windows and run a box fan. It requires a specific science called psychrometrics. Restoration experts use psychrometrics to precisely manipulate temperature, relative humidity, and airflow to literally force water out of your home's structural components. It is advanced thermodynamics in action. They are turning your flooded living room into a highly controlled scientific drying chamber. And this brilliantly illustrates how technicians basically have to become structural detectives to pull this off. They rely heavily on specialized tools like thermal imaging. You see, standard moisture meters only tell a fraction of the story, but infrared cameras, they detect tiny temperature differentials, revealing massive, invisible moisture pockets that are trapped completely out of sight behind your walls or buried under hardwood floors. Without that technology, the hidden water would just sit there, causing your structural framing to silently rot and eventually fail weeks later. All right, once they've tracked down the water, professionals follow a super rigid mental map. Specifically, it's called the IIC RCS 500 Standard Protocol. It's a highly systematic three-step halt to the destruction. Step 1 is emergency extraction. Step 2 is structural drying. And step 3 is full restoration. You absolutely cannot skip a step, and you definitely cannot rush a step. Doing so leaves the property incredibly vulnerable to future structural failure, and honestly, it'll probably result in denied insurance claims. Let's break those down a bit, starting with step 1. This is the aggressive triage phase. We are talking about extracting standing water at an incredible 200 gallons per minute. They bring in these massive truck-mounted systems, submersible pumps, and heavy extractors to pull the sheer gross volume of water straight out of saturated carpets, padding, and deep basements. The entire goal here is to get the physical volume of water out of the building before it has a chance to wick any higher up into the porous drywall. Let's move to step 2 and see how this builds. This is the slow, highly calculated phase. Now we're deploying commercial dehumidifiers and high-velocity air movers and running them for anywhere from 3 to 7 days. You've stopped the active flooding, sure, but now you have to meticulously drive the remaining moisture out of the deep structural wood. Technicians are going to check this daily, constantly adjusting the psychrometric environment to make sure evaporation is happening at the maximum safe rate. And they do not turn off those machines until they hit this single, crucial digit. 6. More specifically, they're looking for a 6% to 12% equilibrium moisture content. That is the strict required target for framing lumber in Central Ohio before any rebuilding can safely begin. Think about it. If a rushed contractor tries to slap new drywall over wood that is still sitting at 15% or 20% moisture, you are practically guaranteeing a massive black mold outbreak right behind your brand new walls. No way. Which brings us to a quote from the source material that perfectly summarizes this entire journey. Remediation stops the bleeding. Restoration heals the wound. I really want you to let that analogy sink in for a second. Extracting the water, setting up the dehumidifiers, and drying the home, that's just stopping the act of emergency so the patient doesn't die. The restoration phase is where your property is actually put back together and made whole again. Because there really is a major financial and operational distinction between these two phases. Mitigation is your triage, the extraction and dehumidification. It merely stabilizes the environment. Restoration is the actual craftsmanship. It's replacing ruined drywall, installing new flooring, painting, and completely rebuilding structural components to exactly how they were before the loss. You absolutely need both to survive a water disaster. So the crucial point here is that the absolute biggest expense multiplier in water damage is delay. Hesitation is literally what transforms a minor, manageable leak into catastrophic structural rot. If you wait a few days just to see if a ceiling dries on its own, it's going to cost you tens of thousands of dollars in secondary mold damage. Immediate professional action isn't just the safest choice for your health. It is unequivocally the only financially sound choice you can make. We've covered a ton here: the complex science, the absolute necessity of speed, and the incredibly high stakes involved when water goes rogue. So, I want to leave you with one final provocative thought. If a pipe were to burst in your home tonight, are you ready for the clock to start ticking? Knowing the invisible physics and thermodynamics of water damage, you now understand exactly what's at risk the moment the water stops. Thanks for joining me on this deep dive, and please stay prepared out there.